Alexander Volkanovski and Ilia Topuria is a fight that is pretty interesting to break down. And the reason for that is it's pretty hard to make a case against Volkanovski being the best 145er to ever walk the face of the earth. You can certainly make the argument that he's not the greatest, that others are more accomplished than him, but just purely looking at skills, nobody in the history of the featherweight division can do as much as he can, as good as he can. It's honestly really simple. Nobody is putting a 5-round striking clinic on Max Holloway, and then is moving up in weight class to then go 5 rounds with Islam Makhachev and hang with him in all the grappling exchanges. So with just that being said, you're pretty much done with any matchup you can possibly think of against Volk. Not that Volk's unbeatable. Nobody's unbeatable. But with how dominant he's been at 145, it is really, really difficult to pick against him. But then all it takes to put just a little bit of doubt in your mind is putting on an Ilia Topuria highlight video and just seeing how nasty this guy's counters and combinations are. And then all of a sudden, you're doubting everything you thought before. Because Ilia fucking cracks. And it is so satisfying to see. I can watch him light people up all day. My favorite one by far was when he fought Damon Jackson. Because he just systematically folded this guy. It was just utterly vicious. And the finishing sequence, ripping him to the body with that liver shot, getting him to drop his hands, then coming over the top, and then finishing with a left hook. I mean, this guy was just lifeless after. It was almost disturbing. Almost disturbing. That's how crazy it is. Ilia's masterclass against Josh Emmett was insane. I mean, he had him in the matrix. His shoulder roll defense, the way he would slip and then counter with these beautiful yet devastating combinations was enough to honestly make you stop and wonder, is he the best boxer in the UFC? He might be. But on top of all that, he has a super well-rounded game. Nobody was expecting him at the time to control Bryce Mitchell from on top so well and then find the arm triangle the way he did. I think the most underrated aspect of Ilia's game is his submissions. We've seen he has really good takedowns. He comes from a Greco-Roman background. He's got good singles and double legs. In the clinch, he'll hit you with suplexes. And he goes to work as soon as you hit the mat. We know he has a good arm triangle, but also the anaconda choke he loves going for. But going back to the Josh Emmett fight, there are some important caveats that I think we need to look at here. Starting off with the basic ones. Josh Emmett's style played perfectly into Ilia's. You see, Emmett's primary offensive approach is boxing, and that is because he has an insane amount of power. If he lands his overhand clean on you, you're going to start seizuring. But as far as having a really high ability to set up your punches, he is a bit lacking in that area. He's not bad, but he is by no means elite. And that was very evident in the fight. I wouldn't say Emmett is quite Michael Chandler when it comes to spamming overhands, but, he's more on that side of the spectrum than the other. The fact of the matter was, Ilia Topuria was the far, far, far more skillful boxer in this matchup, and Emmett didn't have the ability to switch up his game plan, so the fight was entirely a boxing match. And as we saw, Topuria completely controlled the fight with his jab. He was waiting for Emmett's huge lunging overhands where he was slipping, countering. Whenever Emmett would blitz, Ilia would turn his body completely sideways, which minimizes the amount of surface area your body is showing to your opponent, making it harder for them to land punches. This defense is really common in boxing, but not so much in mixed martial arts because if your opponent followed up with a leg kick as you're blading your body, you're going to have no way to defend that. But as we saw from the fight, Emmett wasn't doing that. But this segues into caveat number 2, leg kicks. At this point, we are all well aware. If you stand like a boxer in MMA with a bladed stance with a lot of weight on that front leg, you are extremely susceptible to leg kicks. We all know that. And again, in the fight between Ilia Topuria and Josh Emmett, they both were standing like that. And Emmett landed every single leg kick he threw. The problem was, he did not throw very many of them. But you know who did? Ilia. Ilia absolutely battered his calf. But you know, it's interesting. I watched every single Ilia Topuria fight on UFC Fight Pass, which included all of his UFC fights and one fight he had in Cage Warriors. He's always used that boxing bladed stance, and he's always had a very heavy boxing approach. But none of his opponents really targeted the leg kick. And, I mean, it's pretty clear to see why, because in a lot of those fights, his opponents were getting absolutely lit the fuck up. And because none of these guys were truly elite strikers. And at this point, you guys do not need me to tell you this, but Volkanovski is an elite striker. His ability to set up his strikes and combinations with feints is second to none. He's insanely quick. He's constantly moving, constantly shifting, switching stances, so it is really hard to catch him cleanly while he's standing still, which is how you really knock somebody out. And of course, really good leg kicks. So, I mean, is that case closed? Volk's going to use his feinting and movement to avoid the pocket and not eat any punches cleanly, and then he's going to be constantly calf kicking for all 5 rounds. It certainly seems that way, but here's the thing. Ilia and his team are so aware of all this. For them not to be, I mean, they would have to be literally vegetables. And yes, I used the word literally. So I'm not saying they'd have to be brain dead. I'm saying they would have to be actual squash. So I'm telling you this right now. They are preparing for the leg kicks. Now, whether or not they're going to be successful in doing so, I mean, I don't know. Ilia has always fought in that boxing stance. And it has real limitations when it comes to dealing with leg kicks. It just does. If Topuria goes out there and fights Volk exactly like he fought Josh Emmett, he's putting himself at a massive disadvantage. But we already know this for a fact. So let's just say hypothetically, he goes out there and he's able to stop Volk's leg kicks. Then all of a sudden we have a very, very interesting fight on our hands. Because at that point, Topuria doesn't have any fundamental weaknesses to Volk's game. Now we're just gauging them skill for skill. And the issue there is, how good is Ilia Topuria? I mean, Volkanovski, we've seen him push to his limits. We've seen him fight through extremely deep submissions. We've seen him get outstruck in the second Max Holloway fight and then come back. We've seen him wrestle hard with Islam Makhachev. But Ilia has pretty much ran through every single opponent he's faced. Ilia did gas out at the very end of his fight against Yusuf Zalal, but that was because he was beating the piss out of that guy. He also ate that head kick from Jai Herbert, but that was at 155 where he was at a huge reach disadvantage. He still picked him up and slammed him right after, and then completely put his lights out with probably the cleanest KO punch I've ever seen. So we know for sure Ilia's high level, but to what extent is a question that we're not going to know until he fights Volkanovski. As far as how they match up in the grappling, from what I've seen, I give the edge in submissions to Topuria, though Volkanovski has shown to be so insanely difficult to submit, Ilia's going to have to drop him and then submit him from there. I don't think it's going to come out of a pure grappling exchange. If he can hurt him and then take his back, I think he's got a good shot. He locks up an anaconda choke. I mean, I don't know. Does Volkanovski even have a neck? Given the fact that Bryce Mitchell was able to take Ilia down and control him on the ground at the end of round 1 during their fight, you gotta give the edge to Volk when it comes to positional grappling. Bryce Mitchell is a really, really good grappler, but he's not Islam. On the feet, if Topuria can deal with Volk's leg kicks, and that is a big if, but if he can do that, I think we're in for a really high-level chess match. We know Ilia's shoulder rolls and his counters are insane, but is he going to be able to set it up with that same level of efficiency dealing with Volkanovski's feints? And as far as whether or not Volk's chin is going to be able to hold up after getting knocked out by Makhachev only a few months ago, I will say there's a 4-month gap in between that fight and this one. That's typically enough time to recover fully from a concussion. Medically, it's advised to take 2 months off of sparring after getting knocked out. So Volk could have done that, then still had an 8-week training camp. If Volk does get caught and knocked out round 1, the speculation is going to be never ending on how much it affected him and whatnot. Look, Ilia has a ton of power, so at this point, whatever. I'm happy with the 4-month break. In Volkanovski's fight with Chad Mendes, which is probably our most comparable matchup we have to this one, Volk really iced him out with the feints, which allowed him to control the fight. Even then, though, he still got dropped. And Mendes, at the time especially, is not the same level boxer as Topuria is. But also, Volk made a ton of improvements from then to the third Max Holloway fight. Honestly, you can go back and forth on this all day because, like I said, we just don't know. There's a lot of unanswered questions here. But here's how I will end this off. Here is my final prediction. If Ilia Topuria can change up his style to defend Volk's leg kicks, I think we might have a new champion. If not, and still.